Now it's my pleasure to introduce your speaker today. Ed Arnold is co-founder and VP of Product at LeveragePoint. Previously, he held senior positions at Communispace, Diamond Management and Technology Consultants, Omnitech Consulting Group, and was a board member of the Boston Product Management Association. He directs product design and development and drives the go-to-market strategy for LeveragePoint. Mr. Arnold holds an MBA in marketing from New York University and MA and BA degrees in political science from Boston University. So with that, Ed, welcome.
Thanks, Taylor, and greetings to everyone with us today and watching in the future recording. This webinar is for product managers. And for those who have product managers in their lives, I myself am a product manager here at LeveragePoint, and in that role, I get to interact with many great product teams at large B2B enterprises. And I also get to hang out with thought leaders and product managers at the Boston Product Management Association. So my goal today is to share some of that knowledge in my talk. And of course, LeveragePoint being a value-based pricing and selling solution, a major focus of this webinar will be about customer value. So the list of topics I'll be covering is first, what is a value-based product strategy? Where do product managers go wrong on value? The key questions you need to answer about your product if you embark on a value-based product strategy. And then lastly, why is this worth doing? So to begin about strategy, I think back to my consulting days where I learned that strategy at its core is about making a deliberate choice to go in one direction and not another. So not deciding, like standing in the middle of the road, is the worst possible thing you can do. Why? Because if you stand there too long, you become roadkill. So you must know where you're supposed to be going. And so when it comes to products, the decision is all about how you're going to compete for customers versus your rivals. And at the highest level, there are two choices you can make. One is the low-cost provider route, which means that whatever market you compete in, you have the lowest cost structure, and you use that advantage for best prices. So think Walmart for retail, Southwest for airlines, Geico for car insurance. Now, you can certainly try to compete with these giants on price, but without their scale, you can't sustain it, and you'll eventually lose. So that leaves many of us with this second option, differentiation, which essentially means making your products unique in a way that customers care about and doing that better than your rivals. Now, of course, there's no surprise there to any of you about that. Uncovering your customer needs and building out competitive advantage is a big part of what we product managers do. But the thing to keep in mind is that, differentiation has a lot of different paths, and each path costs you time and money. And you need to make some smart, deliberate choices about where you're going and where you're not going. So value helps that and helps make better decisions about differentiation. And the types of decisions we're making are things like, which customers segments should you prioritize? What features or services should be part of your offer? How do you capture some of the value you're creating in your pricing? And last, but certainly not least, how do you communicate that differentiation to your customers through marketing and sales channels? Now, making those right decisions leads to a lot of improved outcomes, especially in the thing that we really care about in the lower right corner, which is more successful product launches. So value helps you differentiate, but we need to be precise about what exactly we mean about value, because value is a word that you hear a lot, and it's used widely, and it's used loosely in business today. And as our good friend Mike Wilkinson once said in one of our webinars, our customers define customer value, not us. So in order to understand value, we need to get inside the brain of a typical B2B customer. And based on my experience, companies approach this in two different ways, which I think roughly correspond to a left brain, right brain analogy. So we'll start with the left side, which is the rational, analytical side. So here, it's all about making the economic business case. You quantify value in terms of business operation and an improvement. You present that ROI or value to customers, and you go from there. We use total cost of ownership, we use value models, we use value proposition, but what characterizes these techniques is that they're very direct and straightforward, and this is the type of work that we do at LeveragePoint every day for our customers. Now the right side, which is the more emotional, intuitive side, companies kind of get at this by uncovering willingness to pay. This is getting at the psychology of pricing. And they use a lot of methodologies that translate a whole lot of qualitative customer perceptions into guidance in terms of optimum pricing or product design. So these are things like value maps, conjoint analysis, and price sensitivity. So this is a less direct approach, and that it tries to uncover the highest price someone is willing to pay without them explicitly knowing why they're paying it. And these techniques are especially valuable for consumer B2C products where there isn't much of a business case. So if you're buying a bottle of shampoo or a flat screen television or a minivan or something like that, these techniques really get at what customers value and what you could charge for it. But I would argue that their value is somewhat limited on B2B products for one key reason, and that is because economic value really drives most B2B decisions. It's probably about 80%, whereas on the consumer side, it's much more of a psychological orientation. And what we found is a lot of the so-called intangibles or qualitative perceptions are actually tied to tangible operating business needs. And Tom Nagel himself said this in his classic book, that economic value is the primary determinant of willingness to pay, and it's not the other way around. So in other words, if you're a B2B product manager, you can't afford to ignore the left side of your customers' brains. Now, I'm not going to go into the mechanics of how you do economic value quantification in this webinar. We've done webinars on this topic in the past. We have great white papers about this and a very extensive blog on best practices, so there's no need to review that today. Instead, I want to talk about something that I think is really important before you get started on this value journey, and that is the ways where product managers get lost or go wrong on value. And these are things like misconceptions about value or their behaviors that get in the way of creating a viable value product strategy. And I'm hoping that by recognizing these traps and giving you some ideas about how to get around them, you can remove some of these barriers to getting at customer-based differentiation. Okay, so I have a top 6 list, and we'll go through them one at a time. And the first one is avoiding the issue, and I think this is an appropriate image for a summer webinar, right? A day at the beach. But the issue here is that, product managers are extremely busy people. And so when they have to take on value for the first time, there's an objection of, hey, we don't have the time, right? So we're going to avoid this initiative. We're going to run to the beach and wait this out. But we don't have time is sort of the issue, and it is a real issue for product managers. Very, very busy people if you're responsible, especially in a new product rollout. But my response to that is, look, you're already thinking about customers, so you do have enough time to think about customers. You do have enough time to think about your differentiation. This is what you do. What value does is this frames this into a map where you can make better decisions. I mean, without that map, you can still get there eventually, but it may take you longer and it may cost you more money. So be careful of the lost opportunities by delaying or meandering in terms of what your decisions are about differentiation. And really, the way to overcome this barrier is really leadership, in a word. And if the company is not providing that commitment, you as a product manager need to personally take this on for your product, or maybe for just a version of your product, and get started. So that's the first one. Number two, lack critical knowledge about the customer. Now, I confess that sometimes I get this look when I talk to people about value. You know, product managers know a lot about their products, and we also know a lot about our technical requirements of our B2B customers, and we probably know about their buying process and procurement practices and things like that. But I would bet you that your biggest knowledge gap is about your customer's operations. How does your customer make money, right? So, for example, do you know what the impact of your product is on your customer's cost of manufacturing? Well, what about downstream customer services costs? Or what about the impact on their inventory levels? Or what about their regulatory compliance risk? This is kind of when I get that look, all right? But on their go-to-market strategy as well, I mean, how does your product help them penetrate new markets? Or how does your product increase the differentiation of your customers' products to their customers? And how do they capture that value? These are the things you need to know about your customer if you're serious about value. And one other thing is, what is the customer comparing you to? What is their next best competitive alternative? In other words, if they didn't buy from you, what would they be doing? They may not be buying your identified best competitor. That's what you're defining. What the customer may be defining you against may be something totally different. It may be an in-house solution, or it may be delaying a strategic initiative where it's just the status quo. Knowing this is a really big factor in terms of the value that you deliver. And so we're going to be talking more about specific questions a little later, but these are the things you need to start thinking about if you're serious about value. Number three. Now, sometimes when companies get over their inhibitions about value estimations, things can get out of hand and you get something like this, and I call this death by data. And usually the weapon of choice is a spreadsheet. And you know, we've seen spreadsheets that sort of look like this. Sometimes they were created by an expert that's long since left, and they have all the great features that Excel can provide you, the pivot tables, the complex what-if scenarios and gizmos. Hey, these are great, but they're also overly complicated. And one of the reasons why they're overly complicated is that they try to do too much. They try to combine multiple products, multiple customers, multiple competitor scenarios, and in a sense what they're trying to do is create the mother of all value models. And when you do that, you lose focus, you lose clarity. Much, much better to start with a simpler use case with just one type of customer versus one type of competitive alternative. And chances are you'll find that 80% of the value that you uncover will be common to all other use cases than you have. So don't spend a lot of time chasing the outlier cases. Also, complexity is caused by overdoing the technical aspects of your offer that don't tie into the operational aspects we were talking about earlier. So sometimes complexity actually hides the fact that there isn't a lot of insight about customers. And one thing that one story I'll share with you, I did look at a spreadsheet like this where buried in it was this assumption that, you know, their reputation as a supplier was worth $1 per pound or $1 per unit in the spreadsheet. And it was like, well, where did that come from? And that's another issue. These types of complex analyses aren't transparent and therefore not good for collaboration, and that's a barrier for good strategy development in general. Also, it's not unusual to find a calculation error buried within. So I rarely trust these. And ironically, there's a tendency for companies to hold on to these spreadsheets for years. And there's this sort of curious bias that, because it's complex and it looks precise, people trust it. And especially when you're not very sure about what value you're actually creating, you're not doing that analysis yourself, you tend to overly trust this. It's sort of like this fallacy about precision. If I were to give you two numbers, 9.875 versus around 10, you'd think that the first number was more accurate because it sounded precise, and that's a fallacy. Without the clear logic of where that number comes from, 10 is a much more honest guess. So don't let that phony precision get in the way of developing value. It doesn't need to be complicated. You can put together a value model with 2 or 3 very solid value drivers that gets the idea across, and you don't need to resort to these sort of techniques. Number 4, assuming that value is a single and timeless numbers. Now, I work with a lot of product managers who have engineering or scientific backgrounds, so they have that scientific mindset, and their products are designed that way and their specs are that way. So that's fine, that's necessary, but they make this assumption that the value that customers get from it is also determined scientifically. And in some cases, you get this impression from pricing consultants and the fact that they do statistical analysis, right? And there's a lot of software that does this. And there's actually a thing called pricing science, right? Pricing science is where you use advanced techniques to analyze transactions. And that's all true. But it has nothing to do with value. Those aren't value techniques. Those are basically analyzing, ordered value. It doesn't talk about the customer brain of it at all. You need to appreciate the fact that value is based on economic theory. And economics is a social science. It's not a physical science. There isn't a Newton third law of value quantification out there, all right? It means that you need to make the business case just like you would in a court of law. You need to have logic. You need to have evidence. You need to make the business case. And the jury in this case is the customer. They'll either believe it or not. So you need to test it. And also, once you come up with a good case, you can't assume that it's done forever. Value changes very rapidly. It changes when your customer's business changes. It changes when competitor offers changes. Changes when you change. So this has to be an ongoing process and not just sort of, hey, we calculated it, it's done, we never have to worry about it again. Number 5, using the wrong metrics. Now, anyone who's ever worked with me know that this is a pet peeve. It happens when you try to show customer value using your product's pricing unit of measure. Now, I don't have a clever picture for this, but I am going to give you a pop quiz. So, get your pencils and paper out, and I'm going to give you a scenario. And the scenario is that you're selling paint to a large OEM of consumer appliances. And you've done the hard value modeling work, and you found 3 specific ways in which your innovative product helps reduce their operating costs. All right? Now, here's the question. Which is the best unit of measure for showing these operating cost savings? So door number 1 is you use operating cost savings of 23 cents per gallon. And the reason that we've selected gallon is that that's how you sell your paint. You sell it in containers that can contain gallons of paint. So is it this choice, or is it choice B, where you're looking at the same cost savings on an annual basis? So operating cost savings per year. Okay, pencils up. And we won't do a show of hands here, but if you've chosen B, then I'd say you chose the better answer. Here's why. When customers think about operating cost savings, things like less labor because of a more efficient process, they're not thinking about it per gallon. I mean, you can't measure labor per gallon. It's sort of an artificial sort of unit in that case. They measure labor in terms of annual salaries or hourly costs that roll up to per year. Likewise, for services costs, disposal costs, etc., this is a more natural way for customers to think about value. Now, the only person at your customer who cares about a per gallon price is that procurement manager, and for one very good reason. If you're selling that paint for $20 a gallon, or if they're buying paint at $20 a gallon, the only thing they care about is reducing the cost per gallon. So if they see something like this, operating cost savings of 23 cents, they're saying, great, it's a discount. It's not a discount because you're going to be trying to capture some of that 23 cents in your price, because if you don't, you're not going to be able to afford the innovation that gives you these great things. This is probably the biggest mistake I see product managers make. Now, you do need to use your price metrics, and you do need to come up with your price per gallon. But if you're quantifying value, you got to think about it in the customer's terms. And if you are communicating to customers, especially the customers who really care about these operating savings, you got to talk about it in the unit. Remember, customers don't get value from your product when they buy it. They get value from your product when they use it. And when they're using it is how you should measure the value. And here's our last one. No validation or iteration. This is the classic throw it over the wall. And I've seen processes where product teams come up with pricing, they throw it over the wall. They will not reveal it until the last minute because they want to make sure they have the latest and greatest data. And once it's over the wall, then the marketing and sales team will take over. Well, obviously that doesn't work. And one of the reasons for that is that when you're thinking about value, you'll never have the right data, so don't wait for the data. You have to test your value hypotheses, and you got to do this as early as often as possible. So until you know what your value hypotheses are, you don't even know what data you need to collect in the first place, right? So what I like to say is, you don't wait, you iterate, you show early versions of this. You have to be proactive in your collaboration with your colleagues and marketing and sales and other downstream functions. Even better, you need to test these value hypotheses early with customers directly. It's amazing how much you could find out if you take these value approach out of the selling process. So I don't recommend testing your value hypotheses in your next high-stakes business deal, but I do believe that if you have customers that you are close to, and those who are very good at value do this, they talk about what their customer business issues are and ways that they address it. They love to talk about that. And those form the basis of your value hypothesis and whether or not you actually have true differentiation. They may have solved the problem some other way. So what we find is that with just a few iterations on your value, you can tremendously improve the value story and how well it's communicated. So that's my top 6 list of common missteps. I hope that gave you some ideas or some thoughts about how you could avoid those traps. What I want to do now is talk about some of the key value questions you need to answer about your product. These are the types of questions that I usually use with teams when I first start working with them. And again, the important thing here is to have that focus. Make some very clear choices here when you do this value exercise. So obviously, what version of your product offer you're talking about, especially with your customer. You may be selling to a lot of different customer segments. But for your first value exercise, choose one. Choose the one that you know best or the one that you serve best, and make that the focus of your effort. Make sure you really know what the main alternative is to your offer. Are you substituting what they're doing today? Are they just starting something new and it's a competitive situation? Really understand that, because that really frames how you would approach it. And then, most importantly, what are the advantages? 3 is a great number. I mean, sometimes it's less than 3, many times it's more than 3, but what are the top real advantages of your offer versus the competitive advantage? And how do those tie to the customer's operations or go-to-market strategy? How does it improve the customer metrics that they most care about? Those are the 3 things. And then as you're doing that, gather whatever information you have available. Even those monster spreadsheets, you could bring those in. There's some insights in those and whatever else. Now, today we're going to give you a special offer about this. For those who take the time to answer these questions, and you'll get these questions in the slides after the webinar. If you answer these questions and you send it back to us at LeveragePoint, and I think we might do the first 3 that we receive, or more or less, we'll see what it looks like. We will build you a value model and a value proposition to go along with that. So if you're willing to do that, just to demonstrate that this is indeed possible, and this may give you something to get started, that's the offer, and Taylor will give you more details about that later. So free of charge, our special summer offer for today. All right. So why are we talking about this? Well, this is a stat that we've used a few times. The fact that product managers don't really have a good track record in their new product introductions. Only 1 out of 4 reached their targets in terms of revenue or margin. And this has been a constant statistic for years. And a leading cause of these failures are due to a disconnect in value, in the value design, or in the communications. So there's definitely room for improvement and reason to try a more focused value approach. And then lastly, does this pay off? Well, there are a couple of studies, well, actually more than a couple of studies. We're citing a couple here that talk about that companies that are seriously committed to this, both in terms of their strategy and their execution, outperform their industry peers by a significant amount. And that ROI pricing book actually is filled with case studies about that, and I think a few of you are going to get that. So those are my remarks. I hope you found this interesting, and I think we have time for a few questions.
Great, thanks, Ed. And we've had a few questions come in so far, but there is definitely still time to enter your question into the panel on your screen, and we will get to as many of them as we can. While you're entering, a reminder to complete that 10-second survey while exiting today's webinar to receive a copy of Ed's How to Put a Value Tag on Your Product, be entered into a raffle giving away 1 free copy of the ROI of pricing, and indicate if you'd like to enter that raffle for a free value model and value proposition by answering those questions from the previous slide. All right, so let's get started on Q&A. First and foremost, I'll take this one, Ed. Yes, this webinar is recorded. The slides and recording will be emailed to you within 2 business days, so be on the lookout for an email from me containing those. All right, Ed, first question for you. How do you find value in commodity products?
Commodity products. Yeah, we hear this. And I think Tim Smith's consultant out of Chicago who talked about this in the best way. He says, look, unless your product is being sold on the commodities exchanges in Chicago, Board of Trade, you don't have a commodity. So the question is, how do you find value where you think you don't have much differentiation? All right, so that's a fair question. I would say that everybody on this call today, it does not have a commodity. So unless you're the low-cost provider, you need to find some sort of differentiation. Or maybe you're a small player, and what you're doing is you're focusing on a small part of the market, either regionally or whatnot. and maybe that's your differentiation, you know, that you're not the Walmart, but you're the corner store that everybody knows, right? That's a form of differentiation. But other than that, you need to find it in the B2B world through improvement of your customers' business results, and there's no other shortcut around that.
Great. Thanks. And I think you get this next one a lot as well. How do you quantify value for intangibles, something like your company's brand?
Yeah. So you don't slap a dollar per unit on your price. I wouldn't do it that way. And there's been some blog posts we've written about this recently that talks about calculating the value of intangibles. But generally speaking, things like brand reputation, marketing folks in your corporate marketing department have a vision of what that means, but it usually means something else in the minds of the customer. It usually means something very, very tangible, right? Such as, I don't have to wait for delivery. So what does that mean? Those things can actually get tied into major problems that customers have in terms of operations, in terms of delays and the cost of delays or the cost of expediting or things like that. So really the exercise around intangible value, especially with brand, is really understanding what brand means to customers. And it's sometimes a little disillusioning when product managers find out that the brand that they spend a lot of time thinking about, you know, customers either are unaware of or they think about it completely different. So you have to kind of get over the brand halo effect, especially in the B2B world, and really think about it in terms of what specific tangible advantages you provide. And sometimes it could be just the fact that you provide better service or more reliability, or they're more trustworthy. But again, these things can be quantified. Even things like risk can be quantified. So that's how we tackle that.
Great. And this next one's a good one, Ed. It's kind of about getting sales commitment and buy-in. So even when preparing the value proposal with your product team, it's questioned when sales is the one who has to actually commit to deliver this whole value that you guys have now quantified. So how do you achieve that commitment?
Yeah, well, I think, so I can read into that question in terms of, well, how do you get the salesperson to commit to the price that you came up with? I want to frame that a little differently. How do you, I think one of the, and we've done some really great webinars on sales adoption of value and value selling. A lot of this has to do with the confidence that the salesperson has, both the confidence of the story behind the product and their own confidence in telling that story, right? And so the first thing we've learned is that, you know, salespeople got to believe in the story. Not necessarily the number. They have to understand the value story to get the customer to believe with them, which means that if you come up with great sources of differentiation that salespeople know will get shot down, then that story isn't going to work. And if the story doesn't work, then the commitment to the price isn't going to work, and then you're stuck. So I think sales channels are great for giving very direct and brutal feedback about value propositions. And it's painful. I know I'm on the receiving end of that, but you have to do it. And you'll find that if you do it earlier, they'll give you better ideas on how to actually position things. And then, I mean, once they feel very confident about the value story, they don't have any qualms about going to a customer and saying, look, we're going to save you $1 million of cost per year, you know, and defend the value there. Once the value is kind of understood and appreciated by the customer, then that price negotiation gets neutralized. So that's kind of what you need to do. You need to actively involve salespeople in the testing process of what your value strategy is.
Yeah, absolutely. And it looks like we just have one more question, but we've got the time, guys. So if you have an inkling of a question, please feel free to shoot it our way, and we'll get Ed to answer it for you. The last one we've got right now, Ed, is where do you get data about customer operating costs?
Yeah, so that's a great question, and I think what I found in working with teams is that there's a lot of information that is embedded in your team members, or at least enough to make what I would call testable hypotheses, right? So you'll never have the exact right data. I think it's more important to have the logic there and start off with the best consensus view of your team. I mean, actually, in some industries, there is secondary data you could buy from market research, or there's even government statistics that you could buy. But the idea there is at least to get what I would call a first cut value model with the logic and some initial assumptions in there. And so what if it's off by 50% or an order of magnitude? At least you have a story of which you can test. One thing I've learned about market research is that if you ask a customer how much their costs are, they won't tell you, or they'll say, I don't know. But if you show them a number and you say, oh, we think that you're spending, $30,000 a year in labor on this product, they'll immediately tell you you're wrong, right? Well, wrong how? Too high, too low, what magnitude? Very quickly you're getting a sense of the operation. So it's a combination of what you have at hand, and you probably have more at hand than you realize, and then a qualitative approach with talking with customers in order to find and find better data, and just again iterating that makes it more powerful, and it also helps give more confidence in the sales channel and then down the line.
Great, thank you, Ed. And just one final reminder before you guys go to register for September's webinar during the exit survey. We're taking a short break in August, but we'll be back in September with Joanne Smith, President of Price to Profits Consulting, discussing the key to success in price negotiation. So that is it from us for today. Thank you all for taking the time to join us, and a special thank you to Ed for your insights. From all of us here at LeveragePoint, we hope you have a wonderful rest of your week. Take care.